I work for Legacie. We're a water infrastructure development company and focus on the industrial water sector, where traditionally there's been a lot of challenges. If you think about regional areas where there's mining, there's been challenges with reliable water supply from groundwater, damage to aquifers and long-term environmental impacts. But there's also been a lot of challenges around First Nations engagement and partnerships, and we've been looking at the industrial space and identified that we really need to come up with a new solution for water supply for these dry regions which have a huge water demand. And that's only being exacerbated. So I've talked about mining. So in Australia, and if we talk about the Pilbara where our project is, there's a lot of iron ore mining, increasingly lithium for batteries, etc. But also there's an increasing demand for decarbonisation projects. So there's a huge forecast demand for hydrogen, for green steel manufacturing, and in addition to that, a huge demand for green iron. Does anyone know much about green iron? You've probably all heard about green steel. Green iron is something which we're seeing a bit of a pivot towards in recent times. So Fortescue, for example, invested a huge amount of money in hydrogen, and then there's been a lot of media about Fortescue pulling out of the hydrogen space. But what they're actually doing is moving away from hydrogen just as an energy source towards hydrogen for purifying and taking impurities out of iron ore. So in the Pilbara, Fortescue has the lowest grade iron ore, and they are now looking at beautiful dry photo here. But they're now looking at green iron as a way of improving the grade of their iron ore before they ship it for manufacturing. And what I want to talk today about is, well, what does a different model look like for industrial water supply? And share a little bit about this example in the Pilbara, which is called Unitywater. And Unitywater is a partnership between Legacie, Nalama Aboriginal Corporation, and Suez, who's a global O&M provider, looking at common user water infrastructure. And I've touched a little bit on the drivers around decarbonisation and the need for hydrogen as part of that process, but also the challenges around native title, tenure and access to the coast. So as part of that challenge around First Nations engagement, access to land, a lot of WA's under native title. So having relationships with Aboriginal groups is critical, as well as that heritage and environmental approvals process. So there's a lot of looking for a solution that does things differently is really critical. And in order for us to decarbonise as a nation and globally, we need to actually, water is one of those critical ingredients. And we've got a government that's looking at water access and security for all. We've got a lot of, so as a priority, we've still got a huge gap in terms of inequality between water supply for First Nations groups and a lot of our urban environments. Future Made in Australia, the First Nations Economic Empowerment Alliance. So there's been a lot, we're seeing a real shift in how we're viewing and working with supporting First Nations groups at the moment in Australia. And some of you would have seen the Garma Festival, which Anthony Albanese talked about economic empowerment as opposed to welfare. And so in the energy sector, we're seeing a lot of models where Aboriginal groups are coming in and having an equity share in a company that's created to supply those projects. And so we're adopting a similar model where we look at Nalama as a partner. They have equity in the project vehicle and seat on the board, Indigenous land use agreement royalties. But it's the first water project in Australia where there's been that type of partnership, where they've had a voice, where they've had equity, and where they've been treated as a genuine partner. And the model is starting to get a lot of attention, not just in Australia, but around the world, because it's first of a kind, but because it actually, a bit like most things in life, and I started this slide with partnering for success. If we try to partner and deliver win-win outcomes for everyone, you often find a better solution that can be delivered more quickly. And through our partnership with Nalama, there's huge wealth creation benefits for them. There's huge ability for them to influence and make sure that their land and water is cared for. But there's also, because they're valued, we've been able to go through a heritage process more quickly than anyone we've ever seen in the Pilbara. And a lot of mining companies looking at us going, how on earth have you managed to build that accelerated approval process? And so I think, how do we look at partnering differently with First Nations to deliver positive outcomes for them, and positive outcomes for industry is critical. And this fourth priority at the moment is really around activating WA's strategic industrial areas. And I think this slide's a helpful example of some of the challenges we face in unlocking industry in Australia. And this is just an example from WA, but you can see along the top of this slide a number of strategic industrial areas, and then evaluation criteria in terms of the infrastructure that they need to be able to effectively develop their project. And in particular, access to water, and you can also see rail infrastructure, but they're two of the areas where there's a huge gap in the market. And the Western Australian government develops projects where they have, they say, oh, we've got a strategic industrial area here, we want you to develop hydrogen, or we want you to develop green steel. And developers are expected to develop all of their own infrastructure. There's no roads, no power, no water. And so we're looking at a solution which, up in this in the Pilbara area, on the northwest side of that map, will enable water to happen for multiple parties. So we've got a gap in accelerating industry, and therefore we've got a gap in accelerating decarbonisation. This slide here shows, just quickly shows where our project's located. You can see the blue area in the middle of that diagram. The top part of the blue is where we've got port tenure and approvals that we're working on, going towards the south, where we're looking at desalination plant with pipelines running along that green corridor to the east and the west. And to the far east is Port Hedland and Badari Strategic Industrial Area. To the far west is Dampier, and there's a Maitland Strategic Industrial Area. And our project will help provide water 5 years faster than any other source. So Water Corp, the water authority there, is not able to develop it quickly. And then each of the mines have been working independently. And so as Legacie, we've come along and said to Nalma, how about we partner? So each of these mining groups, we've come along and said, rather than try and do your own scheme, how about you focus on mining, which is your core business, or hydrogen manufacturing, which is your core business. We'll develop water supply it to you at the gate, and operate it for you so that we can deliver it quickly, and they can focus on developing their project. So you can see here some of the key players in the project. I've talked about Nalma and Legacie, Suez, an O&M provider, Sequana, who is our study manager and bringing a lot of expertise in desalination and large water schemes to the project. And then BP is one of our foundation off-takers. So we're talking to, they've got a large hydrogen scheme, 80 gigalitres, and there's a number of other players up here, such as Fortescue, De Grey's Mining, who you would have read about today. I don't know if you saw it, my share prices went through the roof this morning, which was wonderful. And some other players such as Azure, Lithium Mines, etc. So huge number of potential demand off-takers. And just briefly before I hand over, we've talked about the importance of First Nations partnerships. We can do things differently, and we can deliver win-win outcomes and treat them with dignity and respect. Common use water infrastructure can deliver value for money. This scheme, rather than extract from groundwater, which I talked to about the damage to the environment, we're using seawater desalination with green power. And finally, to unlock decarbonisation, we need to supply water at scale and rapidly as part of that enabling infrastructure. So I think I'm probably out of time, and it's hopefully that gave you some insight. Happy to talk more about the project and talk more about some of the benefits and that model and the difference it's bringing for the region. Thank you.